Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get things started. I do want to show you, I think I can show you, the website real quick like I was talking about. So let me get that pulled up. Hopefully I can get you to see it. Yes, and I'm going to be doing something with it. Yep. I have some jokes today that I think will be good. They should be fun. I've got several, and I have one that was submitted. So, like I did last time, I'm not going to, reveal who it is unless you guys like the joke. If you like the joke, I'll tell you who sent it, and then we'll go from there. We are going to continue our study on the life of David as we've been, and we're in lesson 5. Now, we're going to really kind of continue where we left off last week. Because we didn't get to everything, obviously. But who'd like to say a prayer for me, though, before we begin, if they would? And then we'll get started. You got it?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for yesterday's men's breakfast. It was a pretty good turnout, and the fellowship was absolutely amazing. And thank you for Sam and Pastor Jim for allowing us to be able to meet up and utilize that time for you and your will. Lord, today I ask that you reach through Charles. You use him in a mighty way to reach through us. And as we go over 1 Samuel, and let us all take everything that we have to heart. Keep our hearts open, keep our minds open, let you absorb everything that you have to teach us. Hide Charles behind the cross. We love you, we praise you in your name.
Amen. All right. So, like I said, I have a couple different jokes. I have one that was submitted, and when I get to it, I'll tell you which one it is, but because I've got several today, just in case, So let me start those off. A preacher visited an elderly church member who was bedridden, and as they talked, the preacher asked the old man, if you could have anything you wanted, anything at all that you wanted right now, what would that thing be? And the old man smiled, and he said, well, Pastor, I'd love to have a piece of my wife's famous apple pie. I sure would love, a taste of that right now. So the preacher, eager to, help the man in his suffering, went down and hurried down to the kitchen. And he asked the man's wife, he said, if she could make her husband that apple pie that he loves so much. And she said, oh, I would love to, but I really shouldn't. And he said, well, why not? She said, well, because, with a twinkle in her eye, of course, she said, well, there's already half a pie under his bed. So that's, all right, you guys didn't like that joke. All right, here's the submitted joke. A pastor was 10 minutes into his sermon when he noticed his young son in the balcony with a pea shooter, right? And the son was leaning over with his pea shooter, and he was spitting spit wads at people. And as the pastor prepared to deliver a very public, scolding for his young son, the 7-year-old hollered out to his dad, you keep preaching, Dad, I'll keep him awake. All right. That one was submitted by Joey. So since y'all like that one. All right. And I got one more for you since you didn't like the first one. Okay. So a Sunday school teaching her class about how powerful God is, she asked the children, can anyone tell me something that God can do? And one little boy eagerly raised his hand and he said, God can do anything. And the teacher smiled and said, that's right, but can anyone think of something specific that God can do? And the room was silent for a moment, and the little girl finally raised her hand, and confidently she said, well, God can make the devil good. Well, the teacher was kind of taken aback and trying to think of how she might explain this to the children, but before she could, the little girl added, but he hasn't done it yet because the devil won't listen. All right. And one last one. I had a few, right? A little boy was attending a baptism service at his church, and for the first time, he'd never seen a baptism. And he watched as the pastor dipped this little baby into the water, And the congregation smiled, everybody was happy and all that. And later that day, the boy, he couldn't stop thinking about it. It just was on his mind all day. And when he got home, he decided that he was going to take his little brother by the arm, and he started dipping his head in a puddle. And 3 times he dipped his head in this puddle. And his mother saw this. She rushed out of the kitchen, and she asked, "What on earth are you doing?" And the little boy looked up innocently and he said, "Well, I'm baptizing him, but I think I'm going to need cleaner water, Mommy, because he's just not turning out right." All right, so that's our jokes for the day. So as we said, we're going to continue our lesson here from last week on David. So let me skip over to the slide that we were at when we left off, and we will get started. Find it. Should be slide 4. Here we go. All right. So a quick recap of where we left off for those that may have missed the lesson. In this part of the story, ultimately, what we're seeing here is that Saul's in a very troubled state. The Bible tells us that a harmful spirit had inhabited Saul, and it was affecting him, right, and caused him to act in ways that were not right. He was being very aggressive, very angry, very upset. And when David came to play music for Saul, something that he did often as he had been added to the court, right, it did calm Saul down. But Saul became so angry and so jealous of David that, as we recall from last week, he tried to kill David. He threw a spear at him, as we remember. And so there's something very interesting that we talked about that last week, that even though Saul was the one attacking David, Saul was the one that was afraid. If you remember, we talked about the fact that the Bible says that Saul was afraid, and it used this word yira for the type of fear that he had. And that type of fear, as we discussed, was a fear like we would have of God, right? So he's very afraid of David because he knows God's with him, right? He knows that God is blessing David, and he, of course, then is having great fear of David. And the irony of that lesson really is that usually we think the person with the weapon is the one who has the power, right? The one that is in control. And the person being attacked should be the one that's afraid. But in this case, it's the opposite. Saul was scared. He was scared literally to death of David. And ultimately, David was not in fear at all. And that was because of David's faith. David knew, as we discussed last week, God was with him. And therefore, he knew he was going to be king. There was no way anyone could kill him at this point, right? And as we talked about last week, though, there comes a point at which David doesn't allow that to continue, because if you do, like we talked about, Jesus had Satan even say to him, "Throw yourself down," as you recall, "throw yourself down from this cliff, and God will save you." And Jesus said, "It is written, you shall not test God," right? And so if David were to continue to allow somebody that he knew was trying to kill him to do that knowingly, at some point that would be testing God, would it not? And so he couldn't allow it to continue forever. And so ultimately, what we discussed is he was then sent by Saul as a commander over what it says 1,000 and sent off in the army. And his reputation with the population grew, as we recall. It said that he came in and went out with the people. And what that denotes is that David, as a military leader, was not just fighting battles. He was coming in and making himself available to the public. He was coming in and talking with them. He would talk to the wives of his soldiers, right? He was making himself available to the people like a king should, right? Whereas Saul, as we've discussed, was not doing those kind of things. And so it was noticed by the people. And of course, their love for David grew and grew and grew. It says, "And all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will be afraid of you." And that's Deuteronomy 28:10. And so that's kind of what's going on here with Saul. He's afraid of David simply because David has been blessed by God. And Saul knows that God has left him, that he's no longer blessed by God, no longer to be king of Israel. And on the other hand, if someone's not walking with God, they find themselves scared, even when they have all the power, because deep down they know they're not in God's favor. So Saul's actions here show us what can happen when we let our emotions, like jealousy, anger, take over. And Saul was so jealous and so angry, he let those feelings control him instead of himself, his mind, controlling himself. And the harmful spirit came upon Saul, and it was able to take control because Saul was already opening the door for that, right? What we talked about with Saul's actions before that, he was worshiping himself, remember, effectively, when it said that he put a monument up for himself instead of for God when he won that battle, remember, from a few weeks back. So Saul has opened the door for this ultimately to happen, and through his jealousy and disobedience, he's allowing these kind of negative spirits and negative emotions to take over his life. And we can do the same. If we put ourselves in that same position, we may find ourselves in the same position as Saul. So we have to be very careful that we don't allow our emotions to take us over. And it's hard sometimes. I understand. We get angry, we get upset, somebody's wronged us. We're going to talk more about that as we see another time here very quickly that David is in a position like this where he's really wrong. Somebody's done something wrong to him, and it's obvious it's wrong. And I want you to see how he reacts. It's not how you and I most of the time react, but it's very important. But it's important to guard our hearts and our minds. The Bible tells us to be careful about what we let into our hearts. Because our thoughts and our feelings can lead to action, right? And we learned that in Proverbs when we did our study of Proverbs. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life." So we need to fill our heart with God's word, fill our heart with God's love. And that way there's no room for those harmful emotions that can come out. So in this part of David's story, we see Saul's jealousy, his fear, and how it led to him to try and harm David. And the irony of that, the fact that he was what most people would consider in control, and yet he wasn't. And so remember, when you feel angry or jealous, take those feelings to God. Take them to him in prayer and ask him to remove those feelings from your heart and give you peace and love. And that way you won't fall into the trap like Saul did and allow those emotions to paint your world, right, to paint your life. And David's actions in Samuel here, 18:10-16, really amplify that he's a man after God's own heart. He's doing what God calls us to do, and that is to not react in those ways. Saul threw a spear at David. David very easily could have picked that spear up, threw it right back, but he didn't at all, right? He walked away, as what we should do in those situations, right? And he trusted in God's plan for him. Rather than his own emotions, rather than his own worries, right? And even in the face of danger and injustice, David did the right thing. And these qualities really reflect the deep commitment to God that he had, and the character of David, and the fact that he was after God's own heart and following God's will. So let's move on now that we've kind of recapped where we were. Let's move on. Let's read 1 Samuel 18:14-16. And who'd like to read that for me? I'll put it up on the screen. You got it? You get whichever you want. You raised your hand first.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Now it happened on the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul.
Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one.
Okay, I'm done.
Here it comes. I apologize. There you go.
And David was prospering in all his ways, and Yahweh was with him. Then Saul saw that he was prospering greatly, so he dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them.
So like we just talked about, he's gaining the love of the people, whereas Saul is losing the love of the people, even though he's king. So let's go ahead and move on to the next verse. We'll read that. Who'd like to read this one? Yeah.
Then Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be a man of valor for me and fight Yahweh's battles." For Saul thought, "My hand shall not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." But David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my life or my father's family in Israel, that I should be the king's son-in-law?" So it happened at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel the Maholathite
I know, that's hard.
as a wife.
That's a hard word. And you did it good. All right, so basically, here's what's going on, and here's what we see, right? David, as we recall, just defeated Goliath. This is only days later, right, that we're talking about here. David has just defeated Goliath, and as we remember, during that time, Saul had committed that whoever defeats this man will have my daughter, right? Remember, he said that. And now, ultimately, Saul is offering his daughter to David, right? And I'll give her to you as my wife. Only, he's asking, be a man of valor and fight Yahweh's battles. So he's effectively telling him, but I want you to fight some more battles first. Right? Sounds a lot like Saul's trying to continue to do what we talked about last week, and that is put David in danger. Right? And that's what he's going to continue to do. In this next several places that we're going to read, he's going to be putting David in great danger. And David's not going to shrink away from that. He's going to continue to do what he believes is right and continue to do his duty. But Saul here is his whole thought, like it says, my hand shall not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. So Saul's thinking, well, I won't have to kill him. I'll just let them do it. Now, the Bible tells us if you are murdering somebody through somebody else's hand, it's no different than it was from your hand. So that's still murder by Saul, whether the Philistines accomplish it for him or not. It's still murder by Saul. So it's still a sin, a very grave sin. But David here says, who am I? And what is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be the king's son-in-law? So he's saying, I'm not worthy of it. He was, actually. But David has humility, as we're to have, right? David is being humble here. And he's saying, look, I don't deserve it, and the response that should have been happened here is Saul should have said, you do deserve it. You just defeated Goliath. You met the conditions that I gave for you to have my daughter, and so you should have her. You should be, my son-in-law. And yet he doesn't. What he does instead is send Saul off into battle. David off into battle, right? Again, for the purpose of trying to get him killed. And then he gives the daughter that should have been David's to another person, right? And that was an insult. And quite frankly, would have been looked at as an insult. We see, the people would have seen this, and they would have realized the insult that this is. Because David had already proven his valor in quite a spectacular way, really, when he defeated Goliath the way he did. When no one else would do it, right? David stepped forward, trusted God to deliver Israel from the Philistines. And God did. That was the moment when David's courage and faith shone the brightest. And Saul's offer here is not genuine. It's a way for him to I can't talk today. It's a way for him to manipulate David further. So he's essentially just moving the goalpost on him, right? Making it seem as though David still needs to prove himself when he already has. Right? And how many times have you faced that in your life? I know you have. Each of us have. At least once. Where you set a goal or you have a goal that someone's given to you. You met that goal and then they say, well, but wait, I meant a little further. Right? You probably got angry. I know I did when it happened to me. I've had it happen more than once in my life. And I got angry. And I responded in anger. But David didn't. What does David do? David said, okay, you set that goal close here? No problem. Where's the next one for me to defeat? That's what David did. Because he trusted God would deliver him not only from Goliath, but from Saul's schemes. And that's what we have to do. We have to understand that not only will God deliver us from our giant, he'll deliver us from those people that want to hinder us in the process of defeating that giant as well. Because there are going to be people, guys, the more that you follow God, the more that you accomplish God's tasks, the more Satan will throw people like Saul in your path. And the more they'll try and move the goalpost on you. And that's up to you. Are you going to be David or are you going to be what I was before? I hope not what I was before. Because David sets the right example, right? And that is for us to do this and say, okay, fine. What's the next goalpost? Keep moving them. I'll keep accomplishing them as long as God asks me to. And that's what he did. So the response that David gave us, again, show us the kind of faith this man has in God. He's not telling God, I'm angry, I'm upset. This is not what I was promised. God, why don't you fix this? He doesn't do that. He says, okay, evidently that's what God wants. You're the leader here. God's put you in place. This is what you're telling me to do. This is what I should do. And that's what he does. And he goes out, and what it tells us is that ultimately David continues to do these tasks in the army, and he is more successful than anyone else in Saul's kingdom, right? And that again raises the love of David from the people, and his valor is held up before the people. So, discussion question. How can we apply David's example to our own lives when we face situations where we feel we deserve something, but are wrongly denied or mistreated? How can we trust in God's timing and plan during those times? And how can we maintain a humble attitude like David? Any thoughts? Yes.
I'm reading this book called Undefendable, and it's basically, from what I'm reading from it, it's like an active taking the thoughts of your mind captive and just purposing in your heart not to let those things affect you the way the world lets those things affect you.
Right.
We can decide, just literally decide what we're going to let bother us.
Sure.
And what we're going to let hurt us. I think one way to do that is making sure that the people that you've got surrounding you are people who have your best interest in mind.
Yes. Support.
We learned in a class one time that, like husband and wife,
Sure.
you guys are not enemies or one against the other. It's like you are a team against the problem.
Sure.
So when things come up and you don't agree about those kind of things, don't immediately jump to this person is against me, which is kind of hard to do sometimes.
It is.
In the passion of stuff, feelings get hurt. But just kind of be in a state of mind to continuously remind yourself that this person or that person who has done something to me, if it's a Christian brother or a sister, you have to think this person is not my enemy. This is my family. This is my brother or sister. If it's a person who is an unbeliever, I think we've got to really put our trust in God's plan
Certainly.
at that point. And even though that person might have been harmed, just remember that we are children of God. And that even though He allows these things, they're for a purpose. And we want to make our Father proud.
Certainly.
So, kind of think of it more like that. How can I use this instance to make my Father proud?
Very good, very good. And absolutely right. A couple things that you stated there with the person that's lost, right? And I know I've said this before. Don't be angry at the blind for being blind, right? They don't know. They don't know any better. So what you should do is try and mold them and shape them to be better, right? In any way you can. Now some are they're not gonna hear it, they're not gonna listen, they're not gonna hear anything you got to say. But you should try anyway. And insofar as what you said with the fact that trust in what God is doing in your life is for your good. You're absolutely right. And that's hard to do sometimes because it can get kind of hairy, right? Life can get hard and you can go, God, I don't get this. I don't really understand this one. I don't see where it's going to benefit me, but okay, right? But you've got to be willing to go, but okay, and look past it. And that's sometimes hard to do, but it takes training. You got to train yourself to do it, really. Absolutely, yes.
I'm finding that being a Christian calls us to a almost supernatural vulnerability.
Yes.
That's not something that we always feel comfortable in
Sure.
doing.
Sure.
Sometimes it's like letting people, not like literally slap in my face, but sometimes some of the things that are said to you or done to you are like a punch in the gut or a
Yes.
slap in the face, but we're called to a different level
Yes.
of vulnerability.
Be not of this world.
Yes,
Yes.
almost like in the situation where Jesus had pieces of his beard snatched out.
Yes.
I mean, we need to understand the reality of all that he went through.
Yes.
Because that's what he's kind of calling us to. Is
Right.
Taking on that kind of just like you said, out of this world kind of moments.
Yeah,
It's just,
it gets
it's
hard.
almost unimaginable, but that's what we're called.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we can't do that on our own, right? In my weakness I have strength. But that strength he's talking about there, that Paul's talking about in that verse, is not his own. It's God's strength. So he's happy he's weak because he knows he can rely upon God, right? And that's what we should be looking forward to as well. So yes, it's certainly not something that we do on our own. And many times you're going to find that when you face a situation like that and you face it the right way, the way God would have you face it, later on you'll look back at it and you'll go, wow, I don't know how I did that. You won't even understand it, right? Because you'll go, I don't get that. Normally I would have said, who you think you're talking to, right? But I didn't, right? And that's only through the power of God that allowed me to be calm like that. Yes.
There's a point in your life where you come to accept God's will.
Yes.
And you learn that He's going to protect you from things He don't want you to be involved in.
Right.
I mean, like, for instance, in business, I know one time I wanted something, and God said no. And I find out that was one of the best decisions He ever made for me, that I did not understand it. I just went on, and eventually it showed to me that He was looking after me. And as you take God at His will,
right,
your faith grows stronger.
Absolutely.
Because you know He's looking after you.
Absolutely.
And when you're dealing with people, it helps. You upset somebody, you apologize, and you just let it play.
Right.
That's the hardest thing in the world that some people do, that people can do. Wait for that other person's heart to soften to accept the apology.
Right.
And then y'all be able to go on.
Right. Absolutely. And you said something very important there. At some point two parts of that are important. At some point you've got to accept God's will, is what you said. The at some point is absolutely true. That doesn't happen the moment you become saved, right? It doesn't. The moment that you profess your life to God, you don't automatically get all this faith, right? It doesn't just pour into you and you don't become David right there, right? It's something you learn over time as you deal with life, as you live life in God's eyes, right? And as you learn from God's plan, you learn to give God your everything, right? Your whole life, including let His will dictate your life rather than your own. But it's a learned thing. It's something that takes time, as you said. So it's very important. And also something else, like you said, many times those things that happen in our lives, the offshoots that we see we go on are God's plan, not something we would expect, and they end up better. And you're absolutely right. God will always direct us to a path that is what's best for us, right? We may not always take it, but that's where we're going to be directed by God. And one other thing that I want to mention, something that it's actually my sister actually had said in the past, that she counts. She'll count in her head when somebody does something to her like that, says something mean. She'll count in her head and give herself time to let it pass, right, so to speak, and then be able to respond. And that's a good strategy, right, to be able to give yourself, because your first reaction is probably not the best reaction, right, because we react emotionally like Saul did usually. But if you give yourself time to think and process what they just did, then you can react in the way that David would, right? So give yourself that time. If that takes counting a few seconds, do it. Sometimes it might take up to 20 seconds, right? So who knows? Depends on what you're dealing with, right? But I've counted quite a few seconds before. So use that. It's a good technique, and I've used it ever since she said it. I've never told her that, but it's a good technique. All right, good discussion. Any other before I move forward? Yes.
I experienced what you're saying about certain people doing things to you.
Sure.
And thank God I have my kids with me because I've discussed we matter with certain people, and I don't like to hurt people's feelings.
Sure.
But the day that this happened, I had to. And I had to ask the Lord to forgive me for that, because it was just came right out of nowhere, this thing that happened. It
Right.
came out of nowhere, and I know God was in it. I mean, I know God put me in that situation to say, hey, this person isn't doing what they're supposed to say they're going to do for you. Or for space that I needed, you know.
Right.
And this person I learned that was taking advantage of me, and I have to, now that I'm by myself, I have to be very careful with that.
Sure.
So when things like that happen, I call my buddy here, and she talks out of me, and we get all together. But I'm very aware of things that are going on around me right now.
Right.
But I didn't have that when Jerry was here, because he was kind of,
You shielded
God
you.
gave me to protect me.
Right. He shielded you, as he should, as head of household. That was his duty, and he did a good job, right? So, yeah. And you're going to find that, look, again, the closer you become to God, the more you'll see this happen. And it's just simply, there are people that they don't like it. They say, why? It angers them to see you blessed by God, right? To see you have joy. Some people just want to steal others' joy. I don't know why. I don't know what they get out of it, right? Because I'm not the kind of person that does that. But there are people, and I know several, that their whole point in life is to steal other people's joy.
Jerry told me one time, he said, there are people out there that can't go to sleep unless they do something.
There's a proverb we read about that. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And I think it's in Proverbs 6. But absolutely. And unfortunately, we've still got to we've got to deal with that. It's something that we have to do. It's not something we get away from. And that's okay too, because again, like you said, God put you in that position to mold you and shape you into more like David, a person after God's heart. And you did the right thing. Even though you had done the wrong thing, you asked God for forgiveness, and now you know what you did wrong. In the future, if you face that situation again, you'll know how to better handle it. So again, you learned from it, right? Which was God's intended purpose. Sure. Absolutely. So we're always going to face things like that. And I'm glad to hear that you have good support, because it's important.
That's what we need when we're in a situation like that. That's why I love this church, because people gather around you and give you the good advice that you need instead of asking someone that doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Always seek godly counsel. If you have somebody to give you godly counsel, seek that first. Always, because that's going to be your best bet. And then seek your Bible and seek God. Pray. Yeah. Those are 3 ways that you can handle a situation like that very well. Yes.
One of the things I didn't learn till I was in my 40s, that was a long time ago. But I wish somebody had told me this when I was a teenager, because I would think it would have made my life a lot flow easier. And that is, be careful how much power you give somebody over you.
Certainly.
Okay? So if it's not, and this is what I would tell my students, and you have that girl drama going on in the classroom, I'd be like, oh man, that's really, but be careful about the power. If it's not somebody who is well versed in Scripture and has a relation, you can have somebody who's well versed in Scripture and not be a Christian.
Sure.
But if it's not somebody who doesn't have an active relationship with Christ, don't take their counsel. Don't take their advice.
Or take it with a grain of salt.
Don't even listen to it.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you what, that giving someone the power to ruin your day, I would have little girls in my classroom just sobbing. I said, listen, honey, are you related to them? No. Your best friend today won't be your best friend in 2 years, in most cases.
Sure.
Unless you're, our age. And then I think I've got maybe 5 people that have been in my life, my whole life,
Right.
since the age of 16. And your friends are seasons. They come in your life, you bless each other for a while, and then they go away.
Sure.
And it's not that you had an argument or something happened. It's just that with Kenny and me, we know that we are seasonal friends. People will be in our life 5, 6 years, maybe 10 years, and then something will happen that moves us on.
Sure.
And I've just learned, be careful how you let people control your thought life, because is it something that's really going to pan out for you in the long run? Or is it going to cause you emotional trauma
Sure. And I would add to that, you shouldn't let anyone control
And
your,
I think
control you,
David
other than
did
God.
a real good job of categorizing his life.
Sure.
Okay, Saul's not godly.
Right.
He got to go.
Right.
You know?
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, David handled the situation as we should. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes. And then we gotta move forward.
I had a really, really good friend. He's more of an acquaintance now. I prayed for him. He was like a brother to me. Worked with him and everything. He was a Christian guy. We lived in Oklahoma. That's how I met him. And he started having lots of marital problems. Got involved with alcohol, drugs, the whole nine yards. His wife raked him over the coals with the kids and everything. And he still was going to church, still, doing all the stuff, but still leading them with worldly ways. Of course, that's when I was kind of not doing the same thing as much. But then I moved here, and we would talk pretty much almost every day. And he started asking about moving here. I also noticed how, every marriage has its problems.
Sure.
You're going to have your ups and downs.
Sure.
I started noticing that his solution was for me to stray. This isn't you, this isn't the answer, try to pray with him on the phone, and he would send me all these Christian songs and everything, and he asked if he could come here. I was like, yeah, we have a decent church, we'd love to have you, her and I talked about it. I was like, yeah, awesome. Well, this is when God starts working.
Sure.
So he got a job offer in Texas, met an old high school flame, and less than a year he marries her. He does it in spite of what his ex-wife did to him. So he marries her, then he adopts the lady's newborn. Kind of like as a slap in the face, and I started noticing how his pettiness was getting worse. He called me up and he's like, so how are things still rough? The easy way out is just go out. Don't even say anything, just leave. Go out and have some fun. That's not the answer.
Yeah.
That's not me. That whole me is gone, it's been gone. And for you to say that, that's absolutely disrespectful. And that's not what God wants.
Sure.
And I just started noticing that it just started kind of getting worse. So God kept him thousands of miles away from me.
Sure.
Because if he would have brought him here, or if he would have came here, that would have been out.
Sure. That temptation would have been harder.
Correct.
Right.
So I started praying on it. And then, he asked for my address. I was like, he sent me all this Christian stuff. His books,
Sure.
Bible, all
Sure.
of it.
There will be tares among the wheat.
And I've known this guy for 20 years. He was, like I said, like a brother. I called him up. I was like, what is all this? And he goes, I don't need it. He goes, my life is good now.
Yeah.
Is it?
Right.
Are you sure it is? This is what God wants. It's not what he wants, it's what I want.
Yeah.
And so our distance has, and our communication is almost non-existent now. And that just goes to show how Satan, how first of all, if you have a weak faith, and you don't have a strong, as she was saying, you don't have a strong group.
Right.
If you distance yourself from the church, if you distance yourself from the Lord, he's going to stand back and let that happen.
Oh, of course.
He's not going to stop seeking you,
Right.
but he's going to stand back and let it happen.
Well, many times we're left our own device. Yeah, we're allowed to stumble. Sure.
Correct. That doesn't mean that you got to stop praying for him,
Right.
but there's a reason why that distance is there now.
Sure.
And I don't make it a point now to reach out and try to communicate.
That's probably good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's depressing to know that that's sometimes how we can be.
Sure. Sure.
To be strong in the faith and then immediately, I won't say immediately, but pretty much we're just derailed.
Well, what I just said with there will be tares among the wheat. A tare looks identical to wheat. Identical. You can't tell it apart at all until the harvest comes. And then when the harvest comes, you can tell the wheat from the tare because the tare doesn't produce grain. And Jesus told us there will be tares among the wheat. You will not be able to tell the difference between them and a true Christian until the harvest comes. And what he's saying there is they'll look identical, they'll act like a Christian, they'll send you Christian books, they'll tell you all they'll know Scripture backwards and forwards. Satan knows Scripture backwards and forwards, guys. But they're tare among the wheat. And they're not something that you should deal with because it's not useful to you, right? They're not going to provide you the bread of life. Stay away. Your best bet, stay away. As far away as you can. So it's good that God put him thousands of miles away. Pray for him, yes. Try and help him, yes. But don't allow him to affect your life, just as she said. Don't give him power in your life, right? Good thought there, good example. Let's move forward because we're cutting things close. Who'd like to read this for me, 18:20 through 24? Yeah.
And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. So they told Saul, and the thing was right in his eyes. And Saul said, I will give her to him, that she may become a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David, for a second time you may be my son-in-law today. And Saul commanded his servants, speak to David secretly, saying, behold, the king delights in you, and all his servants love you. So now become the king's son-in-law. So Saul's servants spoke these words in David's hearing. But David said, is it trivial in your eyes to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? And the servants of Saul told him according to these words which David spoke.
Very good, thank you. So what we see here, right, is Saul's ongoing attempts to use the prospect of marriage to manipulate David, right, and harm him. So now that David's been being successful with being in the military, his stature is rising among the people. Saul once again says, "Well, I've got another daughter, Michal, and I'll let her marry you, and you'll be my son-in-law." And again, his point for doing this is simply to try and manipulate David, try and find a way to get David to die by putting him in a bad position. And David, again, his response here is, I'm not somebody that is important. My family is of low stature, etc. So even with that, the servants came to him and said, look, the king delights in you, the servants love you. Come do this, be the king's son-in-law. And again, David's response there, very important. He says, is it trivial in your eyes to become the king's son-in-law? So he's saying, do you understand the importance of this? You're treating it like camp or something. You're treating it like it's something simple and I should just jump at because it's offered. This is an important thing and a very, very important thing for the kingdom, not just for me. And so I have to be very careful about how I go about this. And we should take an example from that. Just because somebody offers something to you, just because somebody tells you you should do something, doesn't mean you should then just jump for it, especially if it's something important. If it's something that affects other people, you should take the time and decide, is this truly something I should do? Don't just jump in because it seems like it's going to bring you esteem or it's going to make you, somebody that's important. And especially when it's something that affects other people, you should think first, right? And consider the importance of it, right? Another example of that is anytime that God calls you to minister to others, that's an important thing. And you should treat it with the importance that it has. Not flippantly, not take 5 minutes of preparation for something like that. You should be doing what God would do, what Jesus would do in that situation. He spent hours in prayer every day, preparing to minister to others, right? And that's what we should do. We should spend the time that he would have spent, right? And give it the importance in our life that he would give it. And that's what David's doing here. He's saying this is important, and it needs to be important in your life as much as it is mine. Yes?
Just reading the commentary in my Bible, it says, the more honorably David acted, the more treacherous Saul became.
Yes.
And it says, sometimes living righteously and being determined to follow God leads the furnace of contempt and rejection to become even hotter.
Sure. Yeah, what we were just saying. You'll have people that will respond to that negatively. They're angry because they see you blessed. It's going to happen. And of course, we should take David's example for our own. All right, so let's move forward because we're really running out of time. I'll read this one. Saul then said, "Thus you shall say to David, the king does not desire any dowry," right? He's saying, look, you don't need to give me any dowry. I know you're poor. I know you can't afford anything. So no dowry except 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. Now Saul planned to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Then his servants told David these words, and it was right in the eyes of David to become the king's son-in-law. So before the day had expired, and I'm going to explain to you what that means, David rose up and went, he and his men, and struck down 200 men among the Philistines. Then David brought their foreskins and gave them in full number to the king, so that he might become the king's son-in-law. So Saul gave Michal, his daughter, as a wife. So a couple things here, right? Saul says back to him, look, I understand your family's poor. I understand, all that, low stature. I want you to still become king, or I want you to become the son-in-law of the king. So I'm offering Michal to you, and what you got to do for that is provide me with the death of 100 Philistines, right, and proof of it by your hand, right? That's effectively what he's saying. You have to do this, not your people, not your soldiers. You have to kill these men, right, and bring me proof you did. And then also beyond that, David said, there's a time limit, as you see here. So before the days had expired. So Saul gave him. We don't know what the time limit was, but Saul said, and I want you to do it by Friday. So he probably gave him an impossible time frame on top of a very heavy task. Killing 100 men by yourself is not easy. They're not going to let you do it easy, are they? Hey, I need to kill a couple more. Can I do you next? You think that's going to work? No. So this was a near impossible task, and he put a time limit on it. Again, dealing very treacherously with David, trying to kill David, right? But David's response is, again, what ours should be. David rose up and went. He rose up and went. He did it. Yes, that's what God's calling me to do. I'm doing it. He rose up and went. And he struck down not just 100, 200. So the task was put before him, and he exceeded the task. Yes?
Just curious about he and his men.
Sure.
Struck down the 200.
Sure.
So it wasn't just him.
Well, his men would have been around him to protect him from others. It was still at his hand those men were struck down, but they're fighting an army, right? So it's not that he went in and just individually found, he went to battle, so to speak. And so he still was by his hand. He would have struck down the 200 in this case. But yes, he took his army with him because, of course, you'll have people trying to get your back while you're striking down somebody else. And so they fought a battle, right? But it was by his hand, according to what it denotes here. But yeah, he had help, and that's okay. You can have help too. If God gives you a task, there's nothing wrong with help. There's nothing wrong with somebody watching your back. I would expect you'd want that, right? But when God gives you a task, get up and do it. David rose up and went. You should rise up and win, right? You should rise up and do it. And do it at your own hands. Don't expect others to do it for you. Don't wait for it to get done. Do it yourself. And, again, though, it's okay to have help. And so Saul gave Michal his daughter as wife, right? Let's move to the next one. We only have 5 minutes left. Then Saul saw and knew that Yahweh was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. So Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continuously. And the afraid here again is that same afraid as a god. Then the commanders of the Philistines went out to battle, and it happened as often as they went out that David behaved himself more insightfully than all the servants of Saul. So his name was highly esteemed. So again, David is successful in every battle that he's put in. He overcomes every task, every thing that Saul throws at him. Every chance that Saul tries to get him killed, David meets it, right? And ultimately, David didn't see this as an insurmountable obstacle, but an opportunity, I should say, to honor the king and God. And so he took it and did it, right? And it gave him the opportunity to marry Michal. And as we know, what we've been talking about here, David, which should have never been king, right? Based upon his where he started, right? He was the son of a shepherd, poor, as he said, nobody of stature, right? And that's who God chose to lead the people, as God usually does. He's going to pick the person you least expect, but the person that has the greatest heart, has the greatest faith, is the one that's after his heart. That's who he will pick. That's who he will choose every time. May not be what you look at, because he's not looking at the outside, as we've said. God's looking at the inside. So he's going to choose the person that is going to be best for the job, based upon their heart. And that was David in this case, right? And ultimately, David met the task, did what he was asked, and became more and more renowned by the people. Okay? I had more that I wanted to talk about, but we're out of time. So, we will continue on next week and continue our lesson with David. Who'd like to say a prayer for me? We'll end the class. Got it? All right.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much, Lord, for this message we learned today, Lord. We pray now that you help us use it in our daily walk with you, Lord, and that we be men of God like that David was, and use this lesson to help people see you through that. Lord, I ask that you give the services about ready to start, Lord, that if there's anyone that doesn't know you as their Lord and Savior, that they will come know you today. Thank you so much for this wonderful thing you've allowed us. And I ask, Lord, that you be in the midst of everything we say. I love you, Lord, I pray in Jesus Christ's name.
Amen. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Great class, great discussion. See you all next week. Yes, sir.